We saw it again. We saw it again. Ja Morant had one of those games where he reminds you exactly who he is. But let me tell you something, because in that game last night against the Detroit Pistons, I saw something that showed me that we could see a form of Ja Morant that we just haven't seen yet. So let's talk about it. Coming up right here, right now on Locked On Grizzlies.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to Locked On Grizzly. I am your solo host today, Damichael Cole, beat writer here in Memphis, Tennessee for the Commercial Appeal. Thank you once again for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen each and every day. Like I always say, we're everywhere, just like the air. That means Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, wherever you go to listen or watch, just because you might be watching on YouTube right now. Locked On Grizzlies is there. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. Just remember that BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. And BetOnline is where the game starts. Wow. 126-111 Grizzlies win over the Detroit Pistons last night. And in my story on the Commercial Appeal, I wrote kind of how it was like a family affair, right? Grizzlies fans, some of you will remember that Niele Ivey, the head coach of the Notre Dame women's basketball team, was an assistant coach for the Grizzlies. And, she recently took that job at Notre Dame a couple years ago, and she's been there since. But Grizzlies are a young team, so she's familiar with a lot of the players, on the team, in particular, the Ja Morant, the Jaren Jackson, Dylan Brooks, and that crew. So before the game, you see her, she's hugging Ja Morant, and then you remember, Jaden Ivey used to be around, the Grizzlies team. He used to come down to the FedEx Forum. Jaden Ivey is the star rookie point guard for the Detroit Pistons, who a lot of people say actually plays like Ja Morant. So you think, is Ja Morant going to let up on him? That's his little bro and all of that? No. Ja Morant comes out, sets the tone early, and one play in particular stands out where he slides to two screens. As Jaden Ivey dribbles the ball to the left, he goes through two screens. Then he blocks the three-point attempt, takes off. Desmond Bane catches the ball, throws it ahead, easy dunk from Morant, 2 points. We saw a lot of plays like that, not only in this game against the Pistons, but this preseason. Later on in the game, one of the biggest highlights was when Ja Morant got a steal. Slid his feet, over, and once he got the steal, picked the ball up, went the other way in full stride. I just haven't seen this a lot. In full stride with Corey Joseph, who is, I think, arguably a really good pesky defender. Corey Joseph reaching for the basketball. Ja Morant goes behind the back, think around the free throw line, doesn't break stride, and dunks the ball in one motion. It's real rare stuff that we're witnessing with this guy. But Ja Morant, 31 points. He had 8 rebounds, 4 assists, 12 of 21 from the field, 2 blocks, a steal. I'm going to tell you something. We've seen a lot from Ja Morant in his first 3 seasons in the NBA. Seen him flirt with the 3 ball, shot career high 34% from 3-point range last year. He's still below league average, but improved. Seen him lead the NBA in paint scoring. In fact, have one of the greatest paint scoring seasons that a point guard has ever had. And then, in this preseason, we've seen Ja Morant take it up a notch on defense. I know defense is boring to a lot of people, but you people that know basketball, the saying that you've heard forever, it's also true. Defense wins championships. Go back to the finals last season between Golden State and Boston Celtics. We saw two great defensive teams just limiting great scores. We saw Jason Tatum struggle. We saw Jason Tatum struggle really in that series pretty consistently throughout the series. We saw Steph Curry, struggle at times, but he had his moments. But we've seen Steph Curry struggle in the finals at times. Again, great defenses. We saw Klay Thompson struggle. We saw Jordan Poole struggle. It was a battle of defenses. And this wasn't a new thing. This isn't new at all. We saw in the finals a couple years ago between the Bucks and the Suns. Jrue Holiday, defense on Devin Booker, Chris Paul down the stretch, made those guys struggle. Go back even before that. The Raptors, Kawhi Leonard, that group, they made teams struggle. They made Golden State struggle. Even the year after that, 2020, the Lakers championship year, Anthony Davis, LeBron James, Alex Caruso, that group of defenders made teams struggle. Ja Morant, in his first 3 seasons, I've talked about this, negative in defensive win shares each year. This past season was a step up. But look, Ja Morant, very motivated guy, as most of you know. And one thing that he said coming back, one thing that he said at media days was defense was a big focus for him in the offseason. And you know what? I see it. I told you guys in the first game at FedEx Forum in the preseason when he was guarding Jalen Suggs, I saw it from the jump. But now it's no denying. I think everyone should be seeing what's happening right now. When he was guarding Jalen Suggs and just seeing him slide through those screens, I mean, Ja Morant's he's in a better defensive stance. He looks engaged. He looks prideful, what you need on defense. Because there are times where you can, I'll let him get that easy too. He's wide open. He got that. Ja Morant's not doing that. He is locked in and he's sliding through those screens against Jalen Suggs. And I'm right there sitting courtside and I'm listening to him. He's saying nope. Every time Jalen Suggs tries to go left, tries to go right, nope, sliding his feet, stand in front of him. He is engaged as I've ever seen him defensively since I've been here in Memphis covering the Grizzlies. So what does that mean, right? Well, you got Dillon Brooks. You know what he's going to do on defense. You will have Jaren Jackson Jr. eventually, and I think Santi Aldama has been, he's shown defensive capability. And then you have Steven Adams on the back end as well, one of the better defensive rebounders in the game as well. Desmond Bane is another guy who's improving on defense, but still I wouldn't consider him in the upper tier like I do Dillon Brooks and Jaren Jackson Jr. and to a certain degree Steven Adams when he's, not guarding guys, on the perimeter in space and things like that. So you have 3 above average defenders. Ja Morant going to that next level changes things. Look at when the Grizzlies play these guards, when they play these Steph Curry and Klay Thompson type backcourts with Jordan Poole coming off the bench, and they play the Suns with Devin Booker and Chris Paul, and then you got to go against Jamal Murray, and deal with that screen and roll with Nikola Jokic and that group over there, and then you play Damian Lillard and Anthony Simons this season, which is going to be, a good backcourt as well. You need multiple guys who can defend well on the wing. Dillon Brooks, you got one. Easy. He's going to take away one guy. Between Desmond Bane and Ja Morant, you need someone to take that next step. And yes, Desmond Bane is your taller guy, but long arms, athleticism, and now we see the willingness. Ja Morant has always had the tools. We saw the tools in one of his very first games when he blocked Kyrie Irving. Remember that? His rookie year, he blocks Kyrie Irving, talks a little trash. The Grizzlies pick up that win, and it's like this guy has the potential defensively. We've seen that from day one. We saw it last season. You remember the chase down block against the Lakers? I believe it was Avery Bradley who he chased down, one of the top blocks of the season, where he basically took the ball from almost off the top of the backboard. Ja Morant, is poised to take another step defensively. We will see how big that step is, but that means a lot. That speaks a lot for, his narrative in the NBA, where once you become so good, people are going to nitpick at your game. First, it was mainly just the shooting, but last season I feel like, it's particularly in that Timberwolves series where Patrick Beverley comes out and says, basically, I'm paraphrasing here, but he basically said, we're attacking Ja Morant. Then he scores the bucket on Ja Morant. He does the little too little sign that a lot of players do when they lower their hand to the ground and things like that, basically making it known, I'm attacking Ja Morant. You think Ja didn't take that personal? Forget winning the series. This is a pride thing we're talking about right here. He took that personal, and he went into the off season, into the dark, as he and his group of trainers like to call it. And I see the engagement, the athleticism has been there, and Taylor Jenkins notices as well. And I think Taylor Jenkins, sees that Ja Morant wants to take that next level. And Ja Morant growing as a defender changes things just from Taylor Jenkins, after the game. He said, I think he's trying to find other ways to impact winning. And then he mentioned the defensive urgency right after that. So Ja Morant becoming a two-way player, an all-around two-way player, changes his ceiling. That's where we really start to get into the conversation of where he is, his top two, possibly, top two at the point guard position, or top three, or however you want to, determine that hierarchy. But all those other guys, you look at Steph Curry, he's been mostly the number one guy. But when you think about Luka, you think about Dame, you think about, Trae Young, and you think about that next crop, a lot of those guys have defensive inefficiencies there. But Ja can separate himself with a great defensive season like he's had in the preseason. We just spent, a good bit of chunk of this talking about Ja Morant. So, talk about another player who is very crucial to what the Grizzlies can do this season, but his availability is now in question. So we'll get into that after the break. But before I talk to you about that, I want to talk to you about BetOnline. See, BetOnline has you covered with props better than ever and more than ever before. Because, see, here's the thing when it comes down to BetOnline. Football, basketball, baseball, hockey, it doesn't matter. And I always tell people, personally, October for me is the best month of sports there is. You have NHL get ready to start. The NBA season is ready to start. Then you have the MLB playoffs. On top of that, you have the NFL season. NFL season is entertaining. I don't care what week it is. So you have NFL season going in stride. NHL about to start. NBA about to start. And you have October baseball. BetOnline is where the game starts as well. So go over there. Go check out those bets that BetOnline have you ready to make over there. I looked myself and was looking at the baseball bets in particular. I saw a lot of those games today. Very, very close. The Yankees, very slight favorites over the Indians. And then you look at the Braves game is not listed yet. The Braves and Phillies game has not been listed because the Braves haven't named starting pitcher. But then Dodgers, very, very slight favorites in their game against the Padres. It's very close. But BetOnline is where you go to take advantage of that, because that is where the game starts. The Grizzlies started their game on yesterday with Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, Dillon Brooks, Santi Aldama, Steven Adams. They started the second half. Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, Dillon Brooks, Santi Aldama, Brandon Clark. Steven Adams, towards the end of the second quarter, it was a play with Corey Joseph. They both going for a loose ball. And as Steven Adams, who's a bigger guy, is lowering, to get the loose ball, his head is kind of in a downward angle. And Corey Joseph, a smaller guy, his back kind of hits Steven Adams in the head. And Steven Adams stays on the ground for a little bit. You see him get up. He walks gingerly. And I think some people were assuming that it was leg related, but the Grizzlies reported on Valley Sports that a neck injury, sore neck is what it was called, was the reason that Steven Adams did not return to the game. I'm not going to pretend to be any type of doctor here because neck injuries are tricky, right? Just from being someone who watches sports, you see stingers and things like that, and you see the longer term neck injuries, which end careers. But in this case, a sore neck. So again, he walked off under his own power. He wasn't moving his neck much. That was very noticeable at the time. But this is just an opportunity for us to talk about what Steven Adams means to this team, just in case he misses any time, because the start of the season is right around the corner. Today's Friday. The Grizzlies are going to get back to Memphis today. Then Saturday, they're probably going to practice. Then you have Sunday. Then you have Monday, Tuesday. And then boom. It's time to play the Knicks. And front court depth has already been hit. It's already been hit. Jaren Jackson Jr. will not be ready at the start of the season. He's progressing well, by all accounts, still on track. But if Steven Adams is to miss anytime, you're starting two guys at power forward and center that you planned on being backups. And I don't care how tough your guards are, how good your guards are, how good your wings are. That's a tough spot to be in, because now your identity is shifting. With Jaren Jackson Jr., there's an identity shift for sure. But Santi Aldama allows the Grizzlies to do a lot of the things that they like to do with Jaren Jackson Jr. in the game because of his length. He can come from the weak side. He might not get there as fast as Jaren Jr. and make that block, but he can come and we saw he alters shots because of his 6'11", 7-foot frame. He can alter shots. He can block shots occasionally as well. So you get that from Santi Aldama, as well as the stretching the floor. He does knock down some three-pointers, and he can take you off the dribble a little bit, a la Jaren Jackson Jr. Not saying he is Jaren, but he gives you some of the same aspects from a game perspective. If you take away Steven Adams, the identity of the Grizzlies shifts. What are the things that make the Grizzlies great? Well, I've talked about it a lot now, and some of you are probably tired of hearing me say this. The Grizzlies don't shoot the basketball well from three-point range. They do not shoot the basketball well. Coming into this game against the Detroit Pistons, I talked about how they shot 29% from three-point range, so far in the preseason. And then you go into the Pistons game, and what do the Grizzlies end up shooting? They shoot 21.8% from three-point range, 7 of 32 against the Pistons. So shooting isn't something that this team is great at. But you know how they offset that? Because you have Steven Adams, the guy who set the offensive rebounding record for the Grizzlies last season. And when he's on the board, he's one of the better offensive rebounders in the game, arguably the best offensive rebounder in the game. But Steven Adams getting those offensive rebounds. You know what that led to? That led to the Grizzlies last season leading the NBA in second chance points. And they've been collecting those second chance points in the preseason in the same tenor as last season. Same type of scoring opportunities are being created. So the Grizzlies, that's why field goal percentage is a mute stat when talking about this team, because they get a lot of their own boards and they create other scoring opportunities. So on any given possession, they can go one of 3 from the field, shoot 33% on a possession, but they get 2 points or 3 points. So Steven Adams is a big identity shift. I talked about it last season when Desmond Bane went in health and safety protocols, and I remember they played. The Grizzlies played against the Bucks. I think they played against the Mavs too, but particularly I remember the game against the Bucks in Milwaukee, and they looked ugly. The team looked real ugly without Desmond Bane because he's their best shooter. They couldn't space the floor and things like that. And with Steven Adams, you're going to miss the screen setting for sure, but the way Brandon Clark rolls to the rim and the force that Xavier Tillman plays with, Taylor Jenkins talks a lot about the force when it comes to Xavier Tillman Sr. Those guys are more than capable in those areas. Scoring around the basket, Brandon Clark is probably the most capable guy on the Grizzlies team in terms of front court players. So you can navigate your way through some of those things, but the strength that Steven Adams plays with, you're talking about a guy who I've had several NBA players tell me that this guy is the strongest guy they play against. We saw him lift up, Tony Bradley in that game against the Bulls. I saw him lift up Kenneth Lofton Jr. in a practice recently in a celebratory way, just picking him up. But Steven Adams' strength, the offensive rebounding, they're both huge. And it's a big difference if he misses any time. And again, I'm no doctor here in this situation. I will have an update on Steven Adams on the next episode of Locked On Grizzlies, so stay tuned for that. We will have an update there, and we'll have an update on Zaire Williams. A lot of people have been asking, what's going on with Zaire? He's missed a couple preseason games. He's been there on the bench. We're going to give you updates on both of those players on the next episode of Locked On Grizzlies as well. But we have a little bit more for you on this episode. We're not done with today's episode as well. We talked about Steven Adams. We talked about Ja Morant. We haven't talked about the rotation. A lot of questions need to be answered before the Grizzlies get to the regular season. And remember, they're going to have to shorten it to 15 roster players. We're going to talk about who are in the prime positions to collect those spots coming up after the break. So, Jake LaRavia and David Roddy, those two first-round picks, rookies, both have shown signs of guys who can be in the rotation for the Grizzlies. But looks like the Grizzlies only have one roster spot. Well, one rotation spot for those two players. Let's break it down. So you know the starters are. We went through the starters. Ja, Dez, Dylan, Santi, Steven Adams. Those are your starters. When you get to that second level, there are three guys that you know for a fact every single night, barring some drastic change or injury or anything like that, will be in that rotation. That's Tyus Jones, Zaire Williams, Brandon Clark. Got two spots left. John Conchar is very likely to be your two guard. They extended him this offseason. I thought that was a vote of confidence. And he hasn't played bad. And the thing with John Conchar is they're asking him to shoot the basketball more. The rebounding gets there. Taylor Jenkins likes what he does on the defensive end. Pretty good chance that he's your ninth guy. No ifs, ands, buts about it. One more spot is left. We saw Xavier Tillman Sr. get a crack at it. We saw Jake LaRavia get a crack at it. We saw David Roddy get a crack at it. And in this last couple games, what we have seen without Zaire Williams playing is David Roddy and Jake LaRavia share the floor together. So who gets that fourth spot? In this game against the Pistons, I thought both actually played decent basketball. With David Roddy, he got 12 points, shot 4 of 8 from the field. And my favorite thing was he made 2 3-pointers, 2 of 4 from three-point range, which led to a plus 16 plus minus. But the thing you probably didn't like is with Roddy is no rebounds, no assists. So you might want to see more in those areas. But Jake LaRavia, he scored 10 points, shot 3 of 8, shot 1 of 6 from three-point range. The three-pointer just hasn't been there for a guy who this team is expecting to shoot really well. And I think it'll come, in time for him. But what you do like is his activity was a little bit better than Roddy's. 3 rebounds, 3 assists, but only was plus 1, in his time on the floor. So it comes down to those two. And right now, I'm going to say that I feel like the team, it feels like it's a toss-up between those guys. They're probably going to interchange them in some type of ways and just to get a feel for who wins out. But I feel like Jake LaRavia will get the first crack. Let's explain why. For one, he hasn't shot the ball well in preseason games yet. But by all accounts, from listening to the players, Taylor Jenkins, they all love his shooting stroke, and they are begging him to shoot the basketball. They want him to shoot the basketball. That's why we saw in that first Grizzlies preseason home game against the Magic, he comes out first quarter, 4 3-point attempts. And we see in this past game, 6 3-point attempts. This is what they want Jake LaRavia to do. And he's not hesitating. As a rookie, that's usually the first hurdle for a lot of guys. They're hesitant because the game is so fast and it's like, oh, I don't want to make a mistake. I don't want to make a mistake. Well, one thing that Taylor Jenkins talks about a lot is playing through your mistakes. He talked about Zaire Williams, in Summer League. One of those weird things that I heard them say a lot was they liked seeing Zaire Williams make mistakes. Sounds weird, right? That's what I thought. But they liked seeing him make mistakes because it was like, oh, okay, now he has something else he can learn from. That was the general feeling with Zaire Williams and just, his progression and his improvement throughout Summer League. So when you factor all of that in, it's going to be between Jake LaRavia and David Roddy. And, getting back to Roddy, everyone I've talked to have been very complimentary of his defense. I know I talked about earlier on an earlier episode, Dylan Brooks basically coming out and saying, look, David Roddy is catching on to the defense really fast. So I had to talk to Roddy about that myself. And he's talked about how he's learning. The guys are making it easier for him. He mentioned Taylor Jenkins as a coach. Taylor Jenkins coaches players, to the tune of, that player. And what I mean by that is some players, they want you to be rah-rah. They want you to yell at them. They want you to get in their face, chest bump them, and things like that. That's how you feel some guys. Some guys want you to just put your arm around their shoulder, tap on them. Hey, man, work on this, and you'll be all right. Taylor Jenkins, according to David Roddy, does a good job of distinguishing between, those two things. And that's helping him grow as a player. That's helping, Kennedy Chandler was another guy talked about it as well. But and as I go on between this battle between these two, I'm talking about Taylor Jenkins here. Go check out my story on commercialappeal.com where I discussed Taylor Jenkins trying to unlock the final form of Ja Morant. I think that's a big step for the Grizzlies this season. Taylor Jenkins trying to unlock the final step of Ja Morant. Talked to both of those guys just about what that looks like and compared it to some historical relationships between coach and player. So go check that out when you get a chance as well. But I think Jake LaRavia is your guy who will get the first crack between these two players. And that's assuming, everything clears health-wise with Steven Adams and Brandon Clark. Because if one of those guys misses time, then you're talking about both of those guys possibly getting in the rotation. Or still, if it's Steven Adams missing times, it may still just be one. And then we see Xavier Tillman Sr. Kind of get up into the rotation there. But that's another thing, since we're talking about Xavier Tillman Sr. here, because quite frankly, I thought there's a possibility that he could be on the roster bubble. But if you look at the numbers right now, the Grizzlies are set up to where one guy who has impacted, the team in the past couple seasons is going to have to go. And my bet right now, which it started in preseason, it was on this guy, and it's still there, and that's Killian Tillie. He's in a tough spot. I remember, talking to Killian Tillie at media days, and we talked, and he talked about the back injury. If you remember last season, I believe he missed from December on and didn't return, and for a while it was just back soreness. Then he talked about having to get some work done on his back, and we're like, well, are you? It's been a while, right? Are you 100%? And Killian said no. And when he said no, when Killian Tillie said no, his back wasn't 100% at media days, I knew then, said it's going to be pretty tough for him to crack this roster, because we mentioned you can make an argument for everyone else being needed in actual game situations. If anything happens to Ja Morant or Tyus Jones, you're going to need Kennedy Chandler to be that backup point guard unless you're going to move Desmond Bane over there or something like that. If anything happens, to Desmond Bane or Dylan Brooks, you're going to need one of those guys. In Dylan Brooks' case, you might need him to move to the 2 and bring in, a John Conchar, Zaire Williams into the starting lineup, which your depth is going to be hit there. With Killian Tillie, they're fine at the small forward and power forward spots without him. They drafted, Jake LaRavia and David Roddy just for that reason. And I talked about the investment that the Grizzlies have made in him, right? In the summer, I was out in Las Vegas. Who was out there? Dylan Brooks was playing with the team and not playing with the team, was practicing, out there in Vegas behind closed doors with the team. And Killian Tillie getting up shots. And don't get me wrong, he wasn't missing many. And then at Grizzlies practices that I've been at so far throughout the preseason, when Killian Tillie shoots the ball, it looks good. And you want to see that on this Grizzlies roster because if I haven't talked about it enough yet, this team struggles to shoot the ball, and that is a guy. Killian Tillie is a guy who can fill it up. And there's an obvious case for the impact he can make for this team. But quite frankly, if you just look at the roster, you look at the spots, and it's like, he's probably the most expendable right now. There was a point in time where I said, look, Xavier Tillman Sr., it's getting pretty tough. But Jaren Jackson Jr. isn't healthy right now. Steven Adams, if he's hurt for any period of time, that always increases, the need for Xavier Tillman Sr. because there's an argument that can be made that without Steven Adams, Tillman is going to start because we've talked about it a lot. Taylor Jenkins loves playing Brandon Clark coming off the bench, being that change of pace guy, coming in with Tyus Jones and them running that, that dynamic pick and roll, being that lob threat and things like that with that lineup in particular. That's why against the Timberwolves, when Brandon Clark was feasting on those dudes and everyone's saying, start Brandon Clark. Taylor Jenkins like, I'm still going to bring him off the bench. He's going to play started minutes. When you look at the box score, you're going to see he's played more minutes than Tillman and any other center on the roster, but still going to bring him off the bench for that change of pace opportunity. So Xavier Tillman is kind of a needed guy, it feels like right now, and that leaves us with Killian Tillie. It's a tough spot, and in some ways you feel like he didn't get a fair shot. You never want injury to be the reason a guy loses his roster spot. But in this case, that's definitely what it is. I think if he had an opportunity to play, he would make his case, to be, an impactful player for the Grizzlies this season. But right now, it's looking like it's a tough draw. And Tillie is likely to get the short end of the stick there. But we're going to have a lot of good things, to talk to you about on the future Locked On Grizzlies episode. But we thank you again for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen each and every day. Before your second listen, I want you to go check out the Ultimate Pro Basketball Preview for 2022. It's a 6-episode extravaganza just to get you ready for the upcoming NBA season. Local team experts and the NBA insiders of the Locked On Podcast Network and Odyssey all coming together into one Ultimate NBA Preview. All you have to do is search for the Ultimate Pro NBA Preview. If you have the Odyssey app, go search for Ultimate Pro NBA Preview 2022. You can search for it on the Odyssey app. You can search for it on YouTube. And you can search for it wherever you get your podcast. Again, Ultimate Pro NBA Preview 2022 is where you can go check that out. Speaking of checking that out, you're going to want to check out next week's episodes of Locked On Grizzlies. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to have a lot of things for you. We're going to have a Zaire Williams update. We're going to have a Steven Adams update. We're going to let you know how the Grizzlies are looking in practice leading up to their upcoming game against the New York Knicks. And we're going to talk about the Knicks a little bit. I've talked to a couple guys over there who, quite frankly, are very fond of what that Knicks team is doing, what they're bringing to the table. The Knicks look like an improved unit. Julius Randle, from what I've seen, has played better, and Julius Randle presents a challenge at power forward. That'll be a very big one for Santiago Aldama. But we're going to get into all of that next week. And we appreciate you for tuning in to the brand, to Locked On Grizzlies. Thank you for tuning in to this final episode of this week. Stay tuned for next week as well. We're going to have you covered with everything going on. And again, I'm Damichael Cole. This is Locked On Grizzlies.